Welcome to the Darnell and Cody show, where we talk about social, philosophical, and political issues currently relevant to us as a society. Today's topic is Judeo-Christian values and their influence on Western values. It's true that Judeo-Christian values did affect Western civilization. That's not up for debate. The question is, how much influence did it really have? And was that influence a net positive? And perhaps most importantly, are those values still relevant as we move on towards the future? But first, let's get some basic definitions. What are Judeo-Christian values? They can be reducible to three things. Broadly speaking, the Ten Commandments, the Golden Rule, and the affirmation of God. None of these things are uniquely Judeo-Christian in the sense that the Ten Commandments have basic rules that common civilizations have formed with or without religion, outlawing things like murder and theft, condemning jealousy, or honoring one's parents are universal. The Golden Rule exists in other countries and cultures and religions outside of Judeo-Christian values. Confucius, for example, outdates Jesus by hundreds of years. The affirmation of God is again something that is very common since arguably the beginning of Eurasian religion with Zoroastrianism. Now, of course, we can get to specific finer points that make Judeo-Christian values unique, but the reality is that to the common person or common society at large, the esoteric theological points don't represent the spirit, the general belief, and the spirit of a civilization at heart, which is why, although Judeo-Christian values had a definitive influence to Western civilization, it doesn't dominate it like many like to argue. So, the first thing I would like to ask or discuss is how much influence did Judeo-Christian values actually have? And there is an overemphasis on Judeo-Christian values that people attribute to Western values and success, and this is tacitly false. The Enlightenment values, which progressed Western society away from the medieval worldview of the church and divine rights of kings, had a far greater impact than Judeo-Christianity in terms of actually moving this civilization towards progress. It was a direct challenge against the Catholic Church and religious institutions in general. It was a movement towards science, leaps away from the witch hunts, the Inquisition, the Crusades, the persecution of Galileo. It was the beginning of the separation of church and state, of capitalism, of democracy, of intellectualism, of civil liberty. In short, Enlightenment values represented the core of secularism, which is what propelled Western society to greatness, in my opinion. What are your thoughts, Cody?
I think even going before Enlightenment values, we can see the rise of real rational thinking and even scientific thinking, and like democracy itself being created by the Greeks about 1,000 years before the rise of Christianity. So they basically invented what we understand as philosophy today, and as well as created the form of government that basically had like all the rules in place that, like you said, are the Golden Rule and the Ten Commandments. And it was very close to a modern form of democracy even. So we can look even before Enlightenment to see that these values aren't just uniquely Christian, or they even existed before Christianity itself. And obviously, like you said, Christianity turned away from Enlightenment and even challenged it at times. And so it's clearly a false belief to think that rational thought and scientific and human rights came from Judeo-Christian culture itself. I would even go as far as to say that believing Christian values is a form, like the foundation of moral values, is basically a form of tribalism, because there's no real reason to believe that. It's just my team is the right side, and I can't question it being different. There's no real reason to even believe that that's true based on historical understanding. So.
Right, exactly. And the Enlightenment values were a direct challenge to the Christian values. And like you said before, the Greeks outdating many of the Enlightenment values is, again, the Christians didn't even believe in the Enlightenment values or what the Greeks believed in. So they're just two completely separate tracks of thought. Now, the influence of Judeo-Christianity, did it have a net positive? And this is something that's really hard to answer because it's not something that's scientific, obviously. But the benefits of religion at heart is that it offered answers to a life that was full of uncertainty. It gave order to a chaotic world where mortality was high. Religion was a survival tool in that sense that later became a tool of control and for a long time the strongest source of power and influence. We can look at the example of the Catholic Church and the popes, the Greek gods and the oracles that interpreted their will, the mandate of heaven in China, the divine rights of Western kings. Whether or not Judeo-Christianity or any religion was a net positive is difficult to answer, but it's undeniable to say that religion had a prominent role and that it was what allowed cultures to develop and form their base for a moral compass. It determined the propriety, and it can't be ignored when we try to understand history and our development as a species. However, we also can't ignore the rigidness that followed religion, the obtuseness and inability to adapt to new information that contradicted religious institutions. Religion was used to condemn ignorant people to torture and death. It was used as a pretext for war and oppression. It halted progress in a wide variety of fields such as philosophy, science, and general academia. In short, we were slow to scale out of religion, even when it became detrimental to us. That all said, the general benefits of religion in giving us a base moral framework or answers to existential problems still apply. It just comes with a lot of baggage that also hamper us in reforming things like abortion, gay marriage, climate change, separation of church and state, education, and so on. Different religions have different problems, and of course, there can be responsible practitioners of religion that don't try to apply their faith in order to build policy for everyone. But a troubling number of people still do, at least enough people that they can influence and be the deciding factor of our political policies. The longer that these Judeo-Christian values stay and influence our society, the more net negative they will have. Aside from its nostalgia, so to speak, all the benefits of Judeo-Christian values could be attained through another religion, spiritualism, or philosophy in general. What are your thoughts, Cody?
I mean, we kind of already basically said this, but like a lot of the positives, quote unquote, that you get from Judeo-Christian values already had existed before Judeo-Christian values themselves even came into existence, as we like want to call it that now. So I mean, it is hard to say or really judge, but it seems to me like people would basically be living the same way that they are now without Christianity. Maybe some people may not have the exact same like moral framework that they do because of their religion or what have you, but I still don't believe that people are just gonna be living like savages or committing murder and like just breaking the law all the time just because their religion that they believe in doesn't tell them to or doesn't exist to not tell them to. But like you said, you can't ignore the fact that it did give people answers to questions, and that is meaningful to people, even if they aren't the right answers or factually grounded. Would be the best way to say that. They could be right for some people, but yeah. You also mentioned the fact that you had the Salem witch trials, the Inquisition, the Crusades, tons of wars between Christian nations and non-Christian nations, and even Christian nations among other Christian nations. The sex crimes that we've discovered that have been going on for probably millennia. I mean, it's pretty obvious that other cultures that have existed longer than Christianity also have values that we basically just agree on as like human species. Like people in India that are Hinduist and people in China that are Buddhist also just believe basically the same moral values that we do. So, the baggage, it's just really hard to say whether that baggage actually is enough to make it just outright say that Judeo-Christian values weren't worth it to have historically. But I think the conversation is worth having, and the debate is there historically looking at how much damage and baggage there is. So,
Right. And that brings us to our final topic or final subtopic is, are Judeo-Christian values still relevant for us now and in the future? They will always be relevant in terms of cultural history, world history, and how they impacted general thoughts. Um, but in terms of these values playing an objective moral framework for the future, it simply fails even as an allegory. There's nothing empowering about living a life to please a higher power that reduces life to a test for the god's self-aggrandization, where life is to be looked upon as nothing more than temptation and procreation, something to struggle over in the hopes of paradise in an afterlife. There is nothing in Judeo-Christian values that can answer more and more complex moral questions. It fails to scale with developing cultural norms and societal progress. It can't be, or it can be rather, used as a supplement in some cases. But trying to use any religion as the be-all and end-all to life's concerns and the societal direction we should take as a species is like the equivalent to trying to build a society upon the teachings of Aesop's fables. What do you think about that?
well, I mean, there's basically like the prevailing worldview that goes like beyond the religion itself that says the stories have value, and as you said, the stories do have value up to a certain point, and like even the culture around these stories also clearly have value. But just looking at like scientific data and trying to prove these stories, a lot of these stories have ended up becoming obsolete. Like we have found the answer to the origin of human life. We haven't found the origin of life itself, maybe. I mean, there's a debate for that. But I mean, we know where natural disasters come from. We understand where the Earth formed in outer space and how the solar system itself formed. And we have data on how people behave and with crime and selfishness, so that we can prove like the negative effects of certain things like theft and murder from a statistical standpoint now in society. So I think we have moved past a lot of the value that these stories have. But like I said, there's always going to still be that cultural value that still is reason to retell these stories, at least for some people. Um, but it's very dangerous to get caught up in that kind of mindset. Sometime people such as Jordan Peterson often like to cite different things, like they'll point to a painting from a pottery over on from the indigenous people in Australia, and it'll have a double helix on this the pottery. And he insists that this somehow proves that humans had like inherent knowledge of DNA. So you have to be careful about, you can't just like delve into the stories themselves as just proof of whatever you want to believe. Like that's just confirmation bias, really. So the stories are what they are, but they are also fiction a lot of the time, or if they're not fiction, then they've been exaggerated in an immense amount. So
Right, there's this mystery to the past that we kind of apply with almost the same reverence and expectation that we look to the future. And I like how you mentioned confirmation bias, because religion is at this point in history is that rather than trying to fit reality and look at it from where it is, we try to make reality fit the mold of religion. Whereas we should really be looking around and trying to say, well, what is the truth? Is more so, how can I make the truth best fit my my book, my scripture, my religious text. It's very backwards. And going back to kind of how Judeo-Christian values impact us today, it's really a political division tool right now. This whole, even the phrase is a very divisive term. Of course, the USA as of right now, or Western society at large even, is largely Judeo-Christian, but it's also excludes people that are Buddhists, Hindus, atheists, or any other form of uh, any other religion. And I can't help but feel like, well, it was first used as a tool against communism. It was used to combat the evil, the Soviet Union. It was used as a form of unity and identity to unite the West against the cold-hearted atheist communists. But right now, it's just being politicized and weaponized by the right, essentially, to push their ideology and worldview onto the people. What are your thoughts on this, Cody?
I definitely think that's true. It's certainly being weaponized to a certain extent politically. But I think the real fundamental problem comes to, like you said, people trying to like prove through their own belief that reality like fits their belief, instead of working from like the mindset of, all right, here's like the actual facts, and then how does like my beliefs fit in with the data that's at hand. So that doesn't mean you suddenly have to stop believing in God just because evolution is proven to be a fact. Like maybe God designed evolution to happen. Maybe God designed the way that the universe itself formed over the past 7 billion years, or however long it's been. Like, it doesn't just outright mean that everything that you believe is false just because something has to be slightly changed based on the data. But ignoring the data to try and just fixate and get the proof that you need to basically, like I said, confirm your bias, like that's just not a good worldview to have, and it actually halts progress. And now we're kind of seeing that, like you said, politically, where like it's being weaponized so that half the country doesn't even believe in climate change, or it's probably less than half, but there's still quite a few people that just don't believe in fundamental science at this point. And it's because of a religious reason that is being weaponized politically, like I said. So yeah, it is incredibly bad. And like you said originally, it was a unifying thing at first. Like we were all able to recognize that we were all on the same team when we talked about that. But now society has changed, and we have many more people who don't take part in the Judeo-Christian culture anymore, and we have people like moving from all over the world to America. So we can't just exclude these people from what's going on either. Like we all have to recognize that they still are part of the same team that we are on now, that they live in America with us. So.
Right, and it ignores one of the people that have been in America the longest, the Native Americans, and they're completely detached from the Judeo-Christian tradition. And like you said, it's just very exclusive, and it doesn't apply anymore. I want to kind of go back to how the morality of Judeo-Christian values doesn't scale. We have like something like gay marriage or slavery. In the New Testament, Jesus kind of limps around the issue of slavery, kind of like justifying it and saying that it's allowed. The slaves should kind of be submissive to their masters. And it's interesting from a perspective of social science. It's basically saying like the saying that Jesus says in the New Testament, give on to Caesar what is his. You can always kind of use that to justify any law that the civilization has. But even the fact that it's about being submissive to your master rather than saying if you see slavery, fight, rise against it, rebel against injustice. It goes a long way to show how religion just can't scale morally. It just doesn't have that scale. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of alluded to the fact that, religious beliefs are essentially static. They don't change with the times, unfortunately. And so, you did have a lot of people that were pro-slavery and even used the Bible to reinforce that belief, because there are literally quotes in the Bible that say that's, beating your slave and not killing them is okay, and being submissive to your master if you're a slave, like you just said. And yeah, like you can't be static when we have so much information just constantly flooding in. Like, we're in an age of information, and like a new age of science right now. We're just like constantly being bombarded with new information that just always is disproving, at least from like the traditional belief that like the earth was created in 7 days or 6 days and then God rested on the seventh, or whatever the story goes. Like, that's just, to believe that as fact now is a halt of progress for humanity itself. And to be static in those kinds of beliefs because of religion is a problem. But like I said, most, I couldn't say the numbers, but many religious people are not static in their beliefs in terms of science. Like, they adjust their beliefs because they recognize that these things are proven to be true. Like, it's not exclusive with one another, but people make it so because of their staticness on one issue, the religion, where that has to be what's true, and maybe they can't possibly be interpreting it wrong, or whatever the case may be. So then they have to ignore the actual, like, real information, and that's when that becomes a problem. Not when people actually are able to adjust their religion, or maybe even just explains like this was just God's plan. Like, He designed all this stuff and it's dope. I think that's not a problem when people do that.
Right. The static nature of religion, it's one of the greatest issues. Like we keep saying, it can't scale to the new problems that we have, and more detrimentally, perhaps, is that it can be justified for the archaic values that it represents, like slavery. It can go back to how in the Civil War, people were justifying slavery quoting the Bible. I mean, how crazy is that? Or how we have these cherry pickers with the Bible saying that, oh, like, of course, you can't be taken literally. We don't actually go around stoning gay people and adulterers. But the message that it does send is quite clear. And we're doing mental gymnastics, or people do mental gymnastics to try to make it more tame, when in reality it's just archaic moral values that used to have some sort of relevance, but now it's, like you said, kind of like a nostalgia factor to for history and for posterity, but it just simply isn't useful to us as much in practical sense.
I think it can be useful for people spiritually, but yeah, I mean, that's basically the purpose of religion, right? It's like, you want to have a closeness with something beyond yourself. I think a lot of people are looking for something like that, and religion provides that. But that doesn't that doesn't also mean that suddenly you just have to believe that like the Earth is only 4,000 years old or 6,000 years old, or like you can believe in both of those things and still have the spirituality that you're looking for, without just denying like the actual facts. And like you said, like that's what the real problem is. It's the staticness, where unfortunately religion does have these like creation stories, and people get hung up on that, and so it does become a problem, unfortunately, especially with things like climate change now, and gay marriage, like you said, slavery before with the Civil War. And these issues always arise because there's these things that are static within religion. And so there's always going to be a subset of the population that's resistant to progress for that reason.
Right, and that's why I think the longer we cling to these archaic traditions, the more of a net negative it will have. Instead of letting it be what it was and saying that, yeah, it had, it was pretty bad in a lot of ways, but it also has some pretty good things, it's come to a point where now it's hindering progress. I don't think anybody can really deny that if they're scientific minded, or even just just being a common person of the modern age, where the morality can't scale to a changing cultural norms, like we were saying before. And I wanted to go back to kind of like democracy and capitalism. I mean, Judeo-Christianity has nothing to do with democracy. It's, if anything, it's submission to authority. Give unto Caesar what is his. It's about ignoring really your civil rights and just focusing on your submission to God, whatever struggles may be. If you think about it, it's really designed to control people and make people more controllable. Think about it. It's about living your life in submission to God. It's okay to have less. The rich will not go into the heaven, and you'll be rewarded after you die. I mean, it's like the biggest scam of ever. It's like you'll get something good after you die, after you suffer, after you abstain from all the things you can get, abstain from getting wealth and prosperity and all these good things, abstain from that, and just live only looking at God and pleasing Him, and then you'll be rewarded in the afterlife. I mean, that's it's a literal scam. I mean, it has nothing to do with democracy or freedom. It's like the antithesis of that. It's about submission to this greater power that's essentially saying your life is only meaningful in submission to me. It's an insane notion of how people try to attribute freedom and democracy to Christ or God or Christianity in general.
I mean, you could go back to way early ages of monarchism, which continued obviously for a very long time in Europe. And kings would always say they're divine, or they have divine rule. Rather, they're chosen by God to be the ruler, and therefore all the subjects must be subservient to them. And obviously, even the priests that were teaching the peasants, it's like, yeah, just go and do your work and pay your taxes to the king. Like, just do what you're told. Basically, don't question anything. Don't fight for anything better than what you have. I mean, that's basically, like you were saying, it's like, it is just like it allows people to be complacent in life because they believe they're going to have something better in the afterlife, like you were saying. And I think that, possibly we can have like a better history and a better life now if people actually decided to fight for what's better now for everybody and those around them, instead of just, being complacent. And we saw that a lot of complacency throughout history, like, thousands of years of people just doing what they were told because they had to serve their duke or whoever was the lord over them.
Right. And what I kind of fear to some of the like, I want to say intellectual Christians, or the theologians that have all these counter arguments to everything we're saying. Basically, they'll have some kind of counter argument, and you listen to their like theological point, or their like very esoteric interpretation of the Bible, and at a certain point you have to say these people are either intellectually dishonest or just bad actors. They're kind of complicit in this fundamentalism that, like we're saying, it's just completely backwards. It doesn't work anymore in the society we're living, and what I do worry is that how much longer are we going to have this baggage drag us towards the future? Right now, there are just so many, there's enough ignorance in the world without we being beholden to these archaic traditions. And I don't want to just blanket say that religion is bad, because I do believe that at the end of the day, um, everyone has some sort of abstract value. I mean, that's what morality essentially is. It's just some abstract value that we believe, but we can't really definitively prove and say scientifically this is how we ought to live, or this is what we ought to believe in. It's always going to be this philosophical question that we're going to have to deal with as a society. But it doesn't help to cling to this ancient, thousands of years old religion for answers. As much as I believe that there's great wisdom to be found in ancient history or in the ancient peoples, it's kind of disheartening to think that the truth is there rather than to be explored and found out ahead of us. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this basically comes back to this staticness of religion, where they do believe that the answers have already been found. Like, that's basically the bottom line. And I think that people that are more scientific minded and more perhaps open to other possibilities, or more aware that the answers are definitely ahead of us still. We have as much as we already know. There's still so much more to learn, and so much more to discover. So yeah, I think it is depressing, especially when you have like people like politicians, quoting the Bible and citing like the Noah's flood, and then saying that that's proof that there can never be global warming or any kind of like climate change ever again that would cause like natural disasters like happened back then. I mean, stuff like that is just an embarrassment, honestly, when we're dealing with future generations that are going to have a planet that's in far worse living circumstances than what these old men grew up with themselves. Things weren't a problem for them, and then they get to die and leave it to their grandkids, which the fact that they aren't worried about is, again, just embarrassing and extremely troublesome. But yeah, like you said, you can't just be hung up on that kind of stuff in the modern age, where we're literally, it's just so much information, so much stuff has been proven already that, we do know a lot of this stuff that the Bible talks about is not factually accurate at the end of the day. So if you want to believe in them as like stories that have value abstractly, that is fine. We talked about, the value of that earlier for humanity as a whole. But, if your family sees value in those stories, great. But, they're not the answers to the questions that we still need to find. And believing that they are is a halt of progress. I think we said that already.
Right. As a final question, we have I think the fundamental problem that we have as we move away from religion is going to be that progress where we try to build some sort of objective moral framework. How do you look at that challenge, and what are some answers that you think you have found personally to be true in regards to some sort of objective morality, or some sort of objective framework, at least, for living life properly or morally?
On a personal level, I think, I just try and morally live a life where I'm not affecting other people negatively. If I'm affecting myself negatively, that's one thing. But basically just, do one to others as you would do unto yourself, I think is a good rule. I think most people live by that to a greater or lesser extent, to be honest. But looking at it more like philosophically, I do like Sam Harris's approach, where you start off by looking at like the ultimate bad, where just like everything is bad for everybody, and we can all agree that like suffering, painfulness, going hungry, sleeplessness, like all those things are at least bad physiologically to humans, and they do have like mental wear and all these kinds of things as well. So we can agree that those things are bad, and then we go from there to get to what is good. So what's the reverse of the ultimate bad? Well, everybody's hungry, or I mean, everybody's fed instead of being hungry. Everybody has a house. Everybody is able to live without anxiety of, being murdered or killed, or going hungry, or worrying about bankruptcy and all these other things that, cause physiological harm, basically. And that's not, unfortunately, that isn't like the end of the question, because that's not proof of anything. All that is still subjective completely. Even if all of us as humans agree that, like, yeah, it's bad if people go without sleep, and physiologically there's evidence to prove that, that doesn't actually mean anything morally, which is the real problem that we're always going to have with this conversation. But I think that taking that approach at least does help people understand the argument without having to bring any kind of religiousness or God into it.
Right. And it's like, I like how you mentioned the golden rule, and you can mention the golden rule without this relation to Judeo-Christian values, because there's other versions of it, and like I said, we brought up Confucius before. He brought it up hundreds, like 500 years before Christ was born. So it still applies even outside of a religious framework. But what I would like to warn people that are listening to this would be that, yes, religion is a problem that we have to face, but it is also a solution to the problem that we face. So it's like both a problem and a solution. And while, yes, right now we like to think that we have better methods and better solutions to the problems we have to kind of come from a point of understanding fundamentally that, like you said, it's ultimately going to be subjective when we ask these, existential moral questions about life. And religion is, unfortunately, always going to be the prominent answer. Even from a philosophical point of view, it's ultimately an article of faith that we commit to and say that, yes, like the framework you mentioned, we have the ultimate bad and we're moving to the ultimate good, is at the end of the day an article of faith. You just, you have to, at a certain point, you're saying, you're committing to that belief that this is true, where physically speaking, scientifically speaking, there's no reality to that or truth to that we should adhere to that belief system. Or just pretty simply, you can't, the fundamental philosophical problem of not being able to derive value from facts. And it's a complex question, it's a complex problem. But I think ultimately what we can, definitely should try to agree on is that these Judeo-Christian values, at least, were very useful, were a powerful survival tool, had a function that served its purpose. But now it's become rather apparent that even if we were to have or need a religious system, it just simply doesn't scale well to the problems that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a decent way of summarizing it. You also can't ignore, of course, the baggage that we talked about, and the possibility maybe that there may have been a better option that just wasn't found in Western society until really the Enlightenment era. there was a lot of things, subservience and people being extremely complacent for a long, long time, where there was, the Dark Ages, not much discovery was found during that time period. Like inventions were very few and far between. And maybe with a different path in history, we could have even more progress than we do right now. But I do agree there was clearly value that people gained, especially with just existential questions like the meaning of life and the origin, just not having the answers to that. I know from personal experience, like um, the fact that we have discovered evolution as a thing is very it's like peace of mind to me almost, because it explains so much. And to not have that explanation, obviously people are going to be looking for something else. And even if, like we said, it was kind of not true, it did give people that peace of mind, and obviously that alone has value to people. So
Right. And that's all the time we have for today. We'll catch you next time with a new episode.
take it easy, everybody.